I mean, I think reminds me of what I heard just earlier today of somebody who was out there waving, holding signs for Ron Paul. They met up with, they saw some Romney people out there, and they said, we knew more about their candidate than they did. So I think our movement kind of encourages people who think and read and are knowledgeable and are interested in things and believe in something, rather than people who think, well, gee, which candidate is most likely to give me a spot on the gravy train? So it's been great. I mean, I've learned so much from these. I mean, these people in this room here, people playing pool and drinking and eating and all this other stuff. These people know all about the Constitution and the Federal Reserve and the economy and foreign policy and U.S. history. They know all this stuff and personal health. Like, I learned so much from these people. So there's no contradiction. You can be as dorky as you want and fit right in here. You can be a jock, heaven forbid, and fit in here. You can be a rock and roller and fit in here. Something for everybody. Well, Revolution PAC is just trying to fill in some gaps and do whatever we can to get the word out about Ron Paul through various means, online, in the mail, on television, whatever, on YouTube. And in particular, in this debate that we're watching tonight, there are going to be several viewings of the most recent ad that we made for Ron Paul, the so-called Compassion ad. This is an ad that on YouTube is already nearing 500,000 views, which blows away the other things that we've done, even that the official campaign has done in terms of ads. In terms of views, this thing just blows everything out of the water because of the great... I'm not going to give it away. If you haven't seen this ad, go over to YouTube and type in Compassion Ron Paul and watch it. But what a story this is about the real Ron Paul. And this is something that the guy could have been bragging about, because his wife Carol tells us there are a lot of stories like this about Ron Paul breaking taboos and helping people at a time when, as in the case of the Compassion ad, interracial relationships weren't to be encouraged, and yet there was Ron helping this poor guy out, but also doing this for free. Like the guy in the Compassion ad never got a hospital bill. There are story after story about this, and yet you would think that Ron Paul would be out there bragging about this sort of stuff, but that's just not who he is. Because when this ad was played for him on the radio, somebody played it for him, he said, you know, this is just what we all did. This is what I was taught to do as a physician. This is what my responsibility was to help people. So this is a guy who's so decent, he won't even brag about his own decency. That's where we come in. We do the bragging for him.
Tell me a little bit something unexpected about yourself that someone might know. Like, what kind of music do you like?
I like some weird stuff. My poor, long-suffering wife, now that we have Pandora streaming through all the speakers in our house, is just thinking, what in the world do we do with this guy who seems so square, you know, superficially. But I basically listen to, like, 1970s progressive rock, so I like Yes, Genesis, early Genesis when they still had Peter Gabriel, Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd. I've seen Roger Waters a whole bunch of times. Seen Yes dozens of times. But then modern day, I like some modern day progressive stuff, but stuff most people never heard of. I like Steven Wilson and Porcupine Tree. Nobody's ever heard of them, but they're so good. I think it's almost like there's a direct connection with how little known you are and how awesome you are. So now Ron Paul in politics is the opposite of that. Like, we all know him and he's awesome, so it doesn't work in all aspects of life. But in music, that seems to be the case. So yeah, I listen to sort of off-the-wall, oddball stuff. But now as I get older, like this year I'm gonna turn 40. As I get older, well, now I find myself occasionally listening to like adult contemporary and like, oh my gosh, what's happening to me? Stop me before it gets any worse. So anyway, yeah, the music question, there's your answer. Well, a lot of people ask questions about, should Ron Paul focus on this or that? Should he avoid this issue, talk about this one instead? And the thing is, he's just not the sort of person who takes to that. If somebody asks him a question, he's going to answer it. If somebody asks him a question, he's not going to say, you know, that's an interesting question, but we need to focus on the budget. Not who he is. And for better or worse, that is who he is. And I love that about him, that he's just going to give you an honest answer. Now, in terms of foreign policy, I think some people think he should steer clear of foreign policy, don't talk about it. But the fact is, everybody knows what his foreign policy views are. So if you don't talk about it, that's basically just not defending it. And right now, I meet around the country a ton of people who are this close to supporting him, but they just can't understand where he's coming from on foreign policy. And there are ways, without betraying his cause, to package his foreign policy that would resonate with conservatives. There is a non-interventionist conservative tradition that he can appeal to and say, look, I'm the most conservative guy in the room, and I'm saying that the most important issue right now, budgetary-wise, is retrenching overseas to avoid bankruptcy. There is just no getting around this. And there are other ways to talk about foreign policy too, but it can be done. There are conservative foreign policy experts you can talk to. I can give names if anybody wants to do an ad like that. But in other words, this can be done. So I think now that you're at a point where he's polling pretty well, but now pretty well isn't good enough. He's got to be the #1 guy. You might as well go for broke and just push this one thing about him that everybody wants to flee from, not talk about. This is the thing that is holding him back, because there are a lot of conservatives who would vote for him because they love him on everything else. Well, you've got to package this so it resonates with him. That can be done. I've come across some people who say, I'm going to support Ron Paul even though I don't like his foreign policy, but I just think he's a man of steel, his arm can't be twisted, he's incorruptible, and that has to count for something. And that, as he said, if the Congress believes there's some threat and they issue a declaration of war, well, I'm sure he's going to go along with that. So, you know, I think we'll be okay. I think by and large there are people willing to do that, but I still think there's a time, this is a critical moment in history here for him to carve out a place on the right wing, because I'm not one of these who says we're neither left nor right. I do think of myself as being politically on the right. And he's got this opportunity to carve out a place for people on the right who are anti-war. And he might as well do it. He's come this far, and he wants to propel ideas that have been unduly neglected or on the so-called fringe, propel them into the mainstream. Then go ahead, let's do it, now or never.